Today and for 2 more Saturdays, you and I are going to whitewater raft through John Paul II's thought. I'm going to be your guide. You will not fall out of the raft. That is a guarantee. I cannot guarantee that you will not weep and gnash your teeth at points along the way. Now, rafting with Karol Wojtyła and John Paul II changes a person. It certainly changed me. So who am I and why am I here? Here's the warp speed version. For 51 years, I've taught theology and philosophy courses at all academic levels. And I know what you're thinking. I can read your minds. You're saying, no, wait a minute. How could he have taught more than a half a century when he is so young looking? Not to mention tall and handsome. Right? You were so transparent. I just can read your mind. Okay. Most recently, when the University of, by the way, for the last 42 years, I've spent focusing on marriage and family. Thank you. Most recently, when the University of Sacramento closed its doors in August of 2011, Father Pepka and I moved our classes over to Easters in the old place and over here. I've had extraordinary students all the way along, but the ones here are amazing. They love learning the faith while at the same time exercising their sense of humor, which always is a good thing. In my view, Easter's Faith Formation Center is the epicenter of catechesis and evangelization in the diocese. Among the various courses I teach, I love this one the best. I've offered it at the old Easters and here some 10 plus times. We don't even know how many times. And I've taken it on the road to Fresno, Santa Clara, Union City, San Francisco, and Toronto, Canada, believe it or not. It continues to be way, way too much fun for me. Maybe not for you, but definitely for me. Okay? On the personal side, long ago, I did find someone who agreed to marry me, Kathy Solari from San Francisco. There are some here who think she should be up for beatification. Joy May is nodding her head. Kathy and I have 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and 5 granddogs, one of which is a retired CHP bomb dog named Cody. He is a 14-year-old black lab. Wow. And a social idiot. He still can't sit still long enough for a lovey. Let's go to work, he seems to be saying. When I say, want to go fetch a ball, tilts his head and looks at me quizzically. When I say, you want to go for a walk, he tilts his head the other side. But when I say, do you want to go find some mannitol hexanitrate, he starts wagging himself to pieces. He said, oh, yes, Grampy, let's go find some mannitol hexanitrate. Oh,
let's go find the C4.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Now, my question is, what is he going to do in dog heaven where there are no bombs? No fun at all, okay? Now, getting more serious, what's the point of this course? Why do it? Verily, the existing secondary material on John Paul II's thought could fill most of the space here. So what's the point? Well, there is a difference between eating fish already prepared and learning to fish and prepare it for yourself, isn't it? There's a difference, and that's the metaphor we're going to be using here. We're going to do the latter. We are going to learn how to catechize and evangelize from the actual text that we're going to be reading from. Okay? Now, how does one traverse such text without going insane? I have a picture for you, a pier and beam foundation. Do you know what a pier and beam foundation is? Well, you see the houses on a hill, right? And they can fall down if you just put a regular foundation. They're going to fall over in a heartbeat. A pier and beam foundation is this. You got a house on the hill overlooking, the whole world, and you drill a hole way down into bedrock, and you put a pier or a pillar in there, and you put another pillar and another, and when that's all done, then you connect them with beams so that they don't move at all this way. That's a pier and beam foundation. Now, what we're going to be doing is identifying the piers of the faith, the piers, the pillars of the faith. And those pillars you're not going to ever forget. Again, you don't have to memorize them. They're already going to be a part of you. You're going to know that they're a part of you. And then if I ask you 10 years from now, what's this? You say, oh yeah, that's easy. And that's what we do. Now, you, with the beams, you get to connect these things with your life as you go on and become catechizers and evangelizers. Now, back to the matter at hand. Why is John Paul II's major catechesis called the Theology of the Body, hereafter the TOB? Why not the theology of the human person? Are we not integrated human beings? You and I will answer those questions and many more throughout the course of this course. Is it possible for John Paul II's thought to get to the person in the pew? That's another question. And the answer is, Donovan, absolutely. Right? Mark that down. Absolutely. And it's been available to the person in the pew ever since 1981 in the form of an exhortation on the family called Familiaris Consortio, Community of the Family. That document is still the best kept secret in what I call the pastoral church. We'll take a good look at Familiaris Consortio on October 26th, right here. Now, today we're going to go over the following items. Edith Stein and some of her thoughts on Genesis. A bit of Carol Wojtyła's Love and Responsibility. Where is that? Oh, this is Edith Stein's book. This is Love and Responsibility. Right? The first part of John Paul II's first encyclical, Redemptor Hominis. If I threw this up in the air, all the leaves would fly all over the place, and you could collect them and sell them for good money. Right? This is ancient, like I am. And Cardinal Schönborn's foreword to Man and Woman He Created Them, this one, as well as the beginning of Michael Waldstein's introduction to Man and Woman He Created Them. Now, Michael Waldstein is our American pronunciation of Michael Waldstein. So if this gets out there to wherever, I better do the Waldstein thing, because otherwise I'm going to get a note from him saying, you are mispronouncing my name. Waldstein. So we're going to do Waldstein. Yes. Uffenstauf and Uffenbuch. I learned German a long time ago. You can see how good I am about that. Now to the question that will jumpstart the first session. Why start with Edith Stein? It's for the same reason that Gospel author Mark starts with John the Baptist. What does John the Baptist do? He points to Jesus the Christ, who is the one who is going to give us life. Edith Stein is pointing to John Paul II unwittingly saying this, that this person, the Vicar of Christ, is going to bring us to a new depth and understanding of that life. Now, Edith is the first contemporary philosopher I know of who goes back to Genesis and asks philosophical questions about what's happening there. She's a woman, she's Jewish, and she thinks outside the box. As an aside, I have 5 20th century philosopher heroes, 3 of whom are women. Edith Stein is one of the 3 women philosophers who've had a major influence on my life. The men are Carol Wojtyła / John Paul II and Josef Pieper. Josef Pieper wrote these 2 books. And we've gone over these in this particular course. The 4 Cardinal Virtues and Faith, Hope, and Love. The man is something else. We read line after line after line, and the truth just comes leaping off the page, and it's a little bit like you've read Scripture that way, and something pops out at you. Well, this is analogous to this philosophy. He will explain this point and then it'll leap off the page and you say, oh yes, that's exactly right. Because I already know that. Because I'm what? I'm primed for the truth already. Background. Edith Stein is born October 12, 1891, on Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement, right? A very auspicious day for a Jewish baby to come into the world, by the way. She grows up in Breslau, Prussia, now Wrocław, Poland. Her parents have 11 children, 4 of whom die in infancy or early childhood, and Edith is the last of the remaining 7. Siegfried, the father, owns a lumber company. On a timber buying trip, he gets heat stroke and dies. And Edith is not yet 2. So there's the mother, Augusta. She says, what am I going to do now? And the older children say, Mother, don't even think about taking over the lumber company, because you can't do this. You're a woman. Not only that, but I mean, this is a man's stuff. And this is Prussia, right? Men control everything. So don't do it. What does she do? She disregards that advice. She not only takes over the company and learns the trade, she gets it out of debt. You can believe that. Now this is the woman that Edith is watching as Edith is growing up. Can you believe? And she will emulate her mother's strength, determination, and confidence. Now, where Frau Stein is religious, very devout, Edith and her siblings are not. Indeed, Edith, at age 13, decides that she's an atheist. Yeah. This is a woman who's already sitting there and saying, wait a minute, this is not making any sense. I'm going to make up sense right up here. Edith starts her undergraduate academic career at Breslau University, where, among other subjects, she studies Greek, psychology, and natural philosophy. As a doctoral student at Göttingen University in Germany, she studies under the founder of phenomenology, Edmund Husserl. She hears about Christianity, believe it or not, for the first time at Göttingen University, from Max Scheler, who has just rediscovered his Catholic faith. And this is what she said about Scheler, Max Scheler. Scheler's influence in those years affected me, as it did many others, far beyond the sphere of philosophy. I do not know in which year Scheler returned to the Catholic Church. It could not have been long before I met him. In any case, he was quite full of Catholic ideas at the time and employed all the brilliance of his spirit and his eloquence to plead them. This was my first encounter with this hitherto totally unknown world. It did not lead me as yet to the faith, but it did open for me a region of phenomena which I could then no longer bypass blindly. So Max Scheler, and we're going to see Max Scheler later, 40 years hence. Who does Karol Wojtyła write his second dissertation on? You have 50 guesses, and the first one you already know. Max Scheler. And he is going to look at Max Scheler's phenomenology and his ethic and say, can we do a Christian ethic, a brand new Christian ethic based upon his writings? That's what he's going to ask. Now, during 1915, the second year of World War I, Edith joins the Red Cross and nurses soldiers who are in a hospital for infectious diseases like tuberculosis. And this is in a town in what is now the Czech Republic. And Lena comes from the Czech Republic. Raise your hand, Lena. There you are. That's a real Czechoslovakia. I mean, in the old sense, right? 100%. Now, 6 years later, Edith wants to be baptized a Christian, but she vacillates between the Lutheran and Catholic faiths. She doesn't know which. So she happens to spend a night at a Protestant friend's house in the summer of 1921. And she happens to look at the library, and there on the shelf is the book of her life by St. Teresa of Avila. Ooh. So she takes that out, and she reads that, and she doesn't sleep that night. She reads the whole thing. And the next morning, she knows two things. she wants to be a Catholic, and she wants to be a Carmelite. So she's made that decision.
Bing bong boom.
She's baptized January 1st, 1922 at the age of 30. Now, to compare, Kara Wojtyła at that very date is just a little tyke. He's just a bit over 1.5 years of age. Before entering the Carmelites, Edith spends 8 years training women teachers at an institute run by the Dominican sisters, and spends 2+ years on the lecture seminar circuit, barnstorming around Germany, Switzerland, Czechoslovakia, Austria, and France. Now, why doesn't she join the Carmelites right away? Well, the answer is really very simple. If you join the Carmelites, you don't get to see your family ever again. And her mother's there, and her mother is absolutely thunderstruck that she has become a Christian. She can't believe anybody can follow this person who was a carpenter and say that this guy is just cooler than school. I mean, it just doesn't work for her. So she waits. Okay. Early in 1933, Adolf Hitler becomes the Chancellor of Germany. 3 months later, Edith writes to Pope Pius XI about the Jewish situation in Germany. Now, this is Edith Stein. Holy Father! Exclamation point. You believe this one? This is what she says. As a child of the Jewish people, who by the grace of God for the past 11 years has also been a child of the Catholic Church, I dare to speak to the Father of Christianity about that which oppresses millions of Germans. For weeks we have seen deeds perpetrated in Germany which mock any sense of justice and humanity, not to mention love of neighbor. For years the leaders of National Socialism have been preaching hatred of the Jews. Now that they have seized the power of government and armed their followers, among them proven criminal elements, this seed of hatred has germinated. But the responsibility must fall, after all, on those who brought them to this point, and it also falls on those who keep silent in the face of such happening. Pope Pius XI actually gets that letter, but does not respond directly. 4 years later, though, he writes an encyclical in German, mit brennender Sorge, with burning anxiety. Do you like that? It only took me about 12 years of German. In which he criticizes Nazism, lists breaches of the 1933 Concordat between the Vatican and Germany, and condemns anti-Semitism. In October 1933, Edith Stein enters the Carmelite monastery in Cologne, Germany. Over the next 5 years, Nazi repression of the Jews waxes, culminating in what they call Kristallnacht, Night of Broken Glass. The brutal attack on Jews in their businesses and synagogues during the night of November 9th, 1938. Because of the heightened hostilities against Germany's Jews, the prioress of the convent in Cologne decides to send Edith to a sister convent in Holland, right across the border, in a town called Echt. She arrives at her new home on the very last day of 1938. Her sister Rosa joins her 2 years later, just before the German Wehrmacht runs over the Low Countries, Holland, Denmark, Belgium. In 1942, the Catholic bishops in Holland get together with 9 other denominational churches and send a telegram to Arthur Seyss Inquart, the Reichskommissar of the Netherlands, demanding that the measures against the Jews be stopped. The telegram is ignored. So, the Catholic bishops send a pastoral letter to the faithful to be read at every Mass, pointing out that the Nazis' tactics are reprehensible. This action does get Seyss Inquart's attention. In retaliation, he's basically saying, you want to play? We're going to play. So in retaliation, he has all the Jewish converts to Christianity rounded up and sent to concentration camps, and Edith and Rosa arrive at Auschwitz on August 7th, 1942, and 2 days later are executed. Whether by gas or gunshot, we don't know. Footnote: at the Nuremberg trials post-World War II, Zeiss in court is found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity and sentenced to death. While in prison, what does Zeiss in court do, you think? Surprises, surprises, he goes to confession to the prison chaplain, Bruno Spitzel, and confesses his sins. Now, what parable does that remind you of? For those of you who have not taken my class, what does that parable remind you of, you think? Prodigal son comes up for sure. Another one? Anybody else? You ever heard of the vineyard workers? And all the really good workers are working all day long, sweating, blood and tears, everything else. And all at once these ne'er-do-wells come along at the last second and throw a bunch of grapes in the back of the truck, and they get full pay. See? And everybody else is saying, whoa, 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 this is not. We've been working all day, and those guys just threw a bunch of grapes in the back of the truck at the last second. And the vineyard owner says what? It's my vineyard. I get to do with my vineyard workers what I want to do with my vineyard workers. And that's our God. That's the God we worship. So in a way, it makes us say, whoa, is this incredible that with real repentance, anybody, including Arthur Zeiss in court, can be saved. Before mounting the scaffold on October 16th, 1946, Arthur says this: I hope that this execution is the last act of the tragedy of the Second World War, and that the lesson taken from this world war will be that peace and understanding should exist between peoples. Amazing. Edith Stein is canonized as St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross on October 11th, 1998. By whom? John Paul II.
Thus, in the first account of the creation of man, the difference between male and female is immediately proclaimed. But mutually they are given the threefold vocation. They are to be in the image of God, bring forth posterity, and be masters over the earth. It is not said here that this threefold vocation is to be effected in different ways by man and woman. At best, this is implied in the quotation cited on the separation of the sexes. The second passage of Genesis, which deals more extensively with the creation of man, elucidates the question a bit further. It relates the creation of Adam, his placement in the paradise of bliss, to cultivate and preserve it, and in the manner of which the animals were brought to him and received their names from him. But to no helpmate corresponding to him was found for Adam. The Hebrew expression used in this passage is barely translatable, ezer kenegdo, which literally means a helper, as if vis-a-vis to him. One can think here of a mirror in which the man is able to look upon his own nature. The translators who speak of a helmet suitable perceive it in this way. But one can also think of a counterpart, a pendant, so that indeed they do resemble each other, yet not entirely, but rather that they complement each other as one hand does the other.
Ezer is found in the Old Testament 21 times. Now, this is why I went into this. I said, where does this come from? Ezer, helper. And so I looked it up in the Old Testament, and it came to the fore 21 times, two of which are for Eve in Genesis, right? Two others are respectively referred to a worldly prince and a rebellious people who will be of no help whatsoever. And I've given you the Psalms on that and Isaiah. The remaining 17 occurrences refer to God as the help or helper of the individual or the people of Israel, if you can believe that. So that is the term used for God helping us. Let me give you a couple examples. See the second one? Blessed are you, O Israel. Who is like you, a people saved by the Lord? He is your shield and helper and the sword of your triumph. Go down to the last one. I lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Oh my goodness. So most of these situations have to do with God's help being actively sought, even required. God is the person's or nation's hope, because God is the person's nation's Ezer. The help needed is directly connected to the life and well-being of the individual or nation. Now, seen in this light, the word Ezer, there are multiple pronunciations of this. I will try my best. Relative to Eve, takes on a depth not evinced in the second creation account. The Revised Standard Version, the Catholic edition, translates Ezer Kenegdo as a helper fit for him. As Michael Wallstein points out, there is nothing in that translation which says that man and woman are of like nature and therefore possess the same dignity. What would be a helper fit for a duck hunter? Yeah, a retriever. Okay. What does hamburger sometimes need? A helper fit for hamburger. See, so a helper fit for him doesn't work. See, it's a translation. It is a translation, but it doesn't point to the depth of what we're talking about here. So in the last part, it says Ezer then has a deeper meaning than that of servant, caregiver, or right-hand person. Hebrew scholar Robert Alter translates Ezer as sustainer. So the woman is sustainer beside him. Okay. Now look at the covers of your text. Where's your text? Look at the cover. Who is under God's left arm?
A woman.
Whoa! There's a woman under there, right? Who do you think that might be? Eve. Yes, of course. And she has that look. She's looking at Adam, and what does the look say?
Why did you do it?
Why did you do it? It hasn't been done yet. No. What I think she's saying is, dude, I mean, this is Californiaese, right? Dude, you have no idea what's coming at you. None. You have not a clue. You're going to wake up and say, oh, boom.
It is not a question here of a sovereignty of man over woman. She is named as companion and helpmate, and it is said of man that he will cling to her and that both are to become one flesh. This signifies that we are to consider the life of the initial human pair as the most intimate community of love.
Now, this is the first time I've ever heard that phrase used for a man and a woman. This is a philosophical phrase that John Paul II then picks up and says the exact same thing. Did they know each other? No. So it's an amazing thing that the Holy Spirit works with the same people, and out of that comes the same language with some of these people. Okay?
God's plan seems essentially altered after the fall in respect to humanity and the human vocation. Thus there has been a change in the relationship of human beings to the earth, to their descendants, and to one another. But all this is the result of a changed relation to God. The narration on the creation and fall of man is full of mysteries, which cannot be resolved here. But it is indeed not presumptuous to discuss a few questions which emerged and to try to answer them. Why was it forbidden to eat of the tree of knowledge? What kind of fruit was it that the woman ate and gave her husband to eat? And why did the tempter approach the woman first? Of course, man was evidently not without knowledge before the fall. He who was created according to God's image, who gave names to all living creatures, and who was called to rule over the earth. Rather, a much more perfect knowledge can be attributed to him before than after the fall. Therefore, it must have been a specific knowledge which is the point in question. The devil actually speaks of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, it is also not to be assumed that man lacked knowledge of good before the fall.
Okay, stop right there. Now, so the point is being made, what? She's speculating that Adam and Eve knew something about good, right? Because they were made in God's image. Did they know something about evil?
No.
Sure. How about theoretical evil? Did they know that if they did something that this was evil? Of course. So they knew theoretical evil also. That was also inside of it, right? So keep going.
Adam and Eve had a more perfect knowledge of God, that is, a more perfect knowledge of the highest good. But they were to be kept, no doubt, from that knowledge of evil, which one gains from the doing of it.
Oh my goodness. Now you underline that 15 times if you got room. Okay? That is a key sentence. And what is that really saying? You and I know theoretically that there are certain things that are evil upon evil. They're beyond evil. Taking the life of an innocent human being is an evil, and it's never going to be not an evil, especially if that innocent life is in the womb, where it's supposed to be protected by layers of flesh and by a man who is sitting there and protecting the person whose womb it is, right? And et cetera, et cetera. So we know that, but no, just follow me. Suppose we become Bernard Nathanson for a week or so, the abortionist, and we actually do abortions. Do we now know something we didn't know before? Yes. We know evil by the doing of it. And by the doing of it, we become what? Used to doing evil. And Bernard Nathanson did how many? 3,000, I don't know how many, and all at once something hit. He said, oh my God, what have I done? He backed off, he became a Christian first, and then he became a Catholic after that. But something nudged him. But through all of those thousands and thousands of abortions, it was the thing to do. I mean, it was something he was good at, and he wanted to help the woman, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Doing evil, the first time you sit there and take God's name in vain as a little kid, are you changed after that? Yes. The first time you might steal something, are you different after that? You know something about stealing that you didn't know before.
The direct consequence of original sin gives a clue as to what they may be held accountable for. The consequence was that man and woman saw each other with different eyes than they had previously. They had lost innocence of interchange with one another. So the first sin may not only be considered as a purely formal one of disobedience to God. Rather, it implied a definite act which had been forbidden and which the serpent presented enticingly to the woman and then the woman to the man. Indeed, the act committed could well have been a manner of union which was at variance with the original order.
No, whoa. Does that sentence leap out and hit you in the smack in your forehead? Or not? Okay?
Absolutely.
That is something else. All right, now read that again, please.
Indeed, the act committed could well have been a manner of union which was at variance with the original order.
Well, that's an amazing sentence. Now, that is a philosopher who is a woman sitting there and speculating about what is happening in Genesis. That's the first time I've ever heard any type of questions like that. Now, if you went to today and said that same sentence, automatically you would think of contraception as coming together in a manner of union at variance with the natural order. The natural order is that they come together completely, right? With no barriers or no anything else. Everything is cool.
But that the tempter first tempted the woman may signify that he had easier access to her, not that the woman was more easily induced to evil. Indeed, both Adam and Eve were still free of an inclination to evil, but because the nature of the temptation was in itself of greater significance.
Now, amen. Okay, that's another one that you underline, right? So, in my day, I grew up in the 1940s and 1950s. It was really easy. We knew why the woman ate the apple or the pomegranate or whatever the heck it was. By the way, if you did go back in a time machine, you would not see a boa constrictor wrapped around a tree talking to a young maiden. Natural history is natural history. We have no idea what that looks like. Okay, so get that out of your mind. The myth itself is archaic language that zeroes in on the truths of the things that we take out of that myth, like we're made in the image and likeness of God, that kind of thing. Okay, so here's my take on this. If you're sitting there and you're a woman, and by the way, the woman didn't wake up, Eve didn't wake up one day and say, you know what, I would love to float around like God and just be pure spirit, so I'd rather be like God. See? That's not what she was attracted to. What she could have been attracted to was the evil one whispering inside of her ear saying, you know what, you really like your relationship with Adam, don't you? And she nods. He says, well, guess what? If you follow my advice, you're going to have more of that relationship and less responsibility. What do you think? Would she be attracted to that? Most every woman would, wouldn't they? See? So what she's saying here is that this temptation, whatever it was directed at her. Why? Because if she makes up her mind, it's automatic, folks, that the man is going to sit there and say, whatever makes you happy makes me happy. And if you don't believe that, you're not. I don't know what race you come from. Okay? So that's the way I see it. So it was actually a temptation. Look, you can have more of what you already love if you just follow my advice. Go off a degree and a half this way or that way, and bingo. We're going to do it that way. So that's my take on that. Now, keep going.
From the first, it was intended that woman's life would be more strongly affected by procreation and the education of posterity. The difference of punishment for the man and woman is also indicative of this. The Lord clearly declared that the new kingdom of God would bring a new order of relationship between the sexes. It would put an end to the relationships caused by the fall and would restore the original order. Matthew 19, 1 through 12. To the Pharisee question as to whether the husband is allowed to divorce his wife, Jesus answered, Moses permitted you to do so because of the hardness of your hearts. But from the beginning this was not so. And he rebuked them with the passage from the account of creation. They will be two in one flesh. And he sets the commandment of the new covenant. What God has united, let man not put asunder.
Now, what Edith Stein is doing here is actually saying, look at Matthew 19, 3 through 8, or 3 through 12, or whatever it is, and saying, and by the way, John Paul II, in his very first Wednesday audience talk, within 45 seconds, recites exactly the same passage. So here again, you have the Holy Spirit sitting here connecting two people with the same mindset, with the same philosophical background, if you can believe that. It's amazing to me. So, where was I here? Oh, yes. So here are the Pharisees coming up to Jesus and saying, what do you think about divorce? And Jesus says, well, I don't think much of divorce, quite frankly. And they say to him, in their minds, they say, we've got him now, we've got him now. And because Moses said we could put away our wives, and Moses is 50 times the prophet this guy is. This guy is not even a pretender in comparison to Moses. And what does Jesus say? He points back, not just to Genesis, but we will talk about this later. We're talking about the Word made flesh here. So he's pointing back to Genesis, which everybody has memorized, right? But he's also pointing back to something that he might know something about. It was not so from the beginning. And that's precisely the phrase that JP2 uses in order to do the theology of the body. Because Jesus said that, he gets to go back and sit there and figure all that stuff out in the beginning.
The vocation of man and woman is not exactly the same in the original order, the order of fallen nature, and the redemptive order. Originally, man and woman were both made responsible to preserve their own likeness to God, their lordship over the earth, and the reproduction of the human race. The preeminent position of the man, which seems to be implied by the fact that he was created first, is not explained in greater depth. After the fall, the relationship between them is transformed from a pure partnership of love to a relationship of sovereignty and subordination and is distorted by concupiscence. The difficult struggle for existence is allocated primarily to man and the hardship of childbirth to woman. But a promise of redemption is present inasmuch as the woman is charged with the battle against evil. The male sex is to be exalted by the coming of the Son of God. The redemption will restore the original order.
Now that is the key phrase there. In other words, we're looking at Edith Steiner sitting and saying, you had a before, a during, and an after. The before was a intimate community of love between Adam and Eve. During, this split up. There was a disconnect happening. And afterwards, we have the disconnect for many, 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 many years. Okay? And then along comes Jesus, the Redeemer, who says, he points, this was not so from the beginning. And you get the impression, do you not, that he is saying, the old order stops right here. The new order will begin, and we are going to get back to this intimate community of love. Now, is it going to be hard? Yes. But I've redeemed you. And if you respond to that redemption through prayer and hard work and everything else, you are going to get there. And you're going to be able to do it. That's what she's saying, Edith Stein is saying. Now we shift to the person to whom Edith unwittingly is pointing to, Karol Wojtyła, John Paul II. Now, some background notes to that, right? Karol Wojtyła is born May 18th, 1920. A sister had died 6 years before he was born. His mother dies when he's 9. An older brother, Edmund, a doctor, dies of scarlet fever when Karol is 12. That leaves Karol and his father, who is a retired army officer in the new Polish army. In 1938, Karol and his father moved to Krakow, Poland, where Karol begins undergraduate studies at Jagiellonian University. A year later, on September 1st, 1939, what happens? The German Wehrmacht overruns Poland and starts World War II. 2 months later, the Nazis arrest, well, let me give you a little background. The Nazis send a letter to the Jagiellonian University officials and say, we'd like to meet with all the teachers and the deans, and we're going to tell them, we're going to have this communion and community of persons, and we're going to be just fine. We're going to tell you what we want and what you want, and you can tell us what you want, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The Nazis come. Before that meeting is over, which is very brief, 184 professors and deans wind up in Sachsenhausen prison camp north of Berlin, and very few of them return after World War II. In early 1940, by the way, the university itself was closed, obviously, at that time. In early 1940, Karol meets Jan Tyranowski, a layman and mystic who introduces Karol to the 16th century Carmelite monk, St. John of the Cross. Thank you. Tyranowski's influence and spiritual mentorship are crucial. Without them, Karol would not be aware of St. John's mystical experience and theology, essential in the later formulation of the TOB. I will say it in my own words. Without Jan Tyranowski, and then without St. John of the Cross, you would not be studying the TOB. It would not exist. It's that simple. So those kinds of things, that constellation had to line up, didn't it? Right? Wonderful. During the Nazi occupation, Karol works at a limestone quarry connected to a chemical plant. So he gets first-hand experience with what manual labor is, right? And the importance of that in man's development. On February 18th, 1941, Karol comes home from work to find his father dead. Later he remarks, I never felt so alone. In 1942, Karol begins studies as an underground seminarian. He almost gets caught by the Nazis, but he escapes. He's hiding behind a door, and they don't open up the door. And so he starts studying as a priest. In January of 1945, the Germans leave Krakow. and the Red Army arrives. How about from the frying pan into the fire, right? Because the Nazi occupation is followed by the communist occupation, the Poles say with wry cynicism that they lost World War II twice, not just once. In the fall of 1946, Carroll is ordained a priest and soon after goes to Rome for graduate work in theology. He studies under the noted French Thomist Father Garrigou Lagrange and writes his doctoral thesis on faith according to St. John of the Cross. 7 years later, Father Wojtyła gets another doctoral degree granted by the reopened Jagiellonian University in Krakow. His thesis asks the fundamental question, can Max Shaler's, remember Max Shaler, who turned on Edith Stein to Christianity? Max Shaler's approach to ethics, will it serve as a basis for constructing a Christian ethical system? In the fall of 1954, Father Wojtyła becomes part of the philosophy faculty at the Catholic University of Lublin. As a cleric and university professor, he goes on backpacking and kayaking trips with his students, both men and women, if you can believe. Co-ed. He's very much aware that young adults need a faith and hope-filled antidote to the atheistic pablum being tube-fed to them by the Communist Party. In 1958, Father Wojtyła becomes an auxiliary bishop of Krakow. Vatican II begins in 1962 at the behest of John the 23rd, Pope John the 23rd. The next year he dies. Who takes over? Paul VI. Yes? Yes. Claire's good. She has, I have to know whether I'm right or not, so I have to ask Claire. Then she nods her head and I'm good. Okay. And Bishop Wojtyła attends all 4 sessions. John the 23rd again dies, and Pope Paul VI, and that same year Paul VI names Bishop Wojtyła as the Archbishop of Krakow. Then in 1967, at the age of 47, he gets his cardinal hat. 7 years before he becomes a cardinal, Wojtyła writes a book that causes a sensation in Poland. It's called Love and Responsibility. This one right here. I do not recommend that you buy it and read it because it's dense. It's philosophical. It's a toughie, okay? But it's actually an outstanding book. As a matter of fact, Janet Smith, who does all kinds of things on Humani Vitae, says that if she had a great books list, that would be on the great books list if you had a great books program. And I agree, without a doubt. Now, Love and Responsibility was way ahead of its time and arguably still is. It's a philosophical and psychological look at human love, specifically conjugal love, which is married love. Now, the very first kind of thing he sets up is, what is the opposite of the verb to love? Now, for those of you who've been in my course 17 times, zip it. Yeah, no, zip it. Like this. For those who have not been, what is the opposite of love, just off the top of your head? Fear?
I'm going to say hate.
Perfect love.
Hate, yeah. If we say hate, then we're talking about emotions. If I say to love, meaning to actually give of oneself, what would be the opposite be?
Selfishness.
Yes. Selfishness? Yes, I do. Yeah, look at it. He wants an A+. He just has this memory. For Karol Wojtyła, it is the opposite is to use. In other words, to use a person as an object. That's the opposite of to love. So that's a very interesting thing. Selfishness goes along with that. All these other things that we came up with were very good. But to use is what his thing is. And this is a critical point for him. A human person can only love a person as a subject, not as an object. If I were to use a person for my own benefit, that would be the opposite of loving that person. Now we'll see later that this argument harkens back to Immanuel Kant. And he was an 18th century Prussian philosopher whose universal rule of moral behavior runs something like this. Act toward another as though your action could become a universal law. whoa, what the world is that? As Wojtyła paraphrases it, act always in such a way that the other person is the end and not merely the instrument of your action. The closest adage we have in our parlance is treat others as you would like to be treated. Does that make sense? Wojtyła then adds love to Kant's imperative.
But it becomes obvious that if the commandment to love and the love which is the object of this commandment are to have any meaning, we must find a basis for them other than the utilitarian premise and the utilitarian system of values. This can only be the personalistic principle and the personalistic norm. This norm, in its negative aspect, states that the person is the kind of good which does not admit of use and cannot be treated as an object of use, and as such the means to an end. In its positive form, the personalistic norm confirms this. The person is a good towards which the only proper and adequate attitude is love. The positive content of the personalistic norm is precisely what the commandment to love teaches.
What he's doing is he's putting love into Immanuel Kant, which Immanuel Kant would not be happy with. And we will see that next week. Right? Now, have you heard of utilitarianism? It comes from the word utility, meaning useful. Right? The utilitarian premise and system of values is this: a person is useful when the system says the person is useful. Is that plain enough? Sure is. Utilitarian state or organization is more important than the individual because it is made up of a collection of individuals. The collective whole is greater than its parts. All totalitarian systems run on the same utilitarian principles. The larger entity knows best, and the individual's usefulness is predicated upon what he or she can give to the state or organization. We'll eventually see that this stance is contrary to one of the principles in Catholic social teaching, which is the principle or the law of subsidiarity. Thank you. Who said that?
Whoever.
Oh,
Yeah.
Right. Now, the question now we have is spousal love different than all the other kinds of loves that we've learned about? The Greek four loves and all that sort of thing? And just plus, or is it a combination of all the other loves plus sex? This is what we're going to have to learn now.
Betrothed love, married love, differs from all the aspects of love analyzed hitherto. Its decisive character is the giving of one's own person to another. The essence of betrothed love is self-giving, the surrender of one's I. This is something different from and more than attraction, desire, or even goodwill. This matter demands more thorough consideration. First of all, the question arises whether any person can give himself or herself to another person. We said above that the person is always, of its very nature, untransferable. This means not only that it is its own master, but that it cannot give itself away, cannot surrender itself. The very nature of the person is incompatible with such a surrender. Indeed, in the natural order, it makes no sense to speak of a person giving himself or herself to another, especially if this is meant in the physical sense.
Okay, stop. Now, we all get this. There's no way that we can actually take our inner I, our identity, and give it to somebody else. Okay? Our logic says no, it's illogical. Now keep reading.
The person as such cannot be someone else's property, as though it were a thing. In consequence, the treatment of a person as an object for use is also excluded, as we have already seen in our closer examination of that subject.
Okay. Stop. Now here's where John Paul II, I'm going to give you a heads up on all of this stuff. John Paul II brings you to a certain point, and then you might ask, is he going to just leave us there? He never leaves you just there. He's always going to take you to a deeper level. Always. Count on it. Okay? Keep reading.
But But what is impossible and illegitimate in the natural order and in a physical sense can come about in the order of love and in a moral sense. In this sense, one person can give himself or herself, can surrender entirely to another, whether to a human person or to God, and such a giving of the self creates a special form of love, which we define as betrothed love. This fact goes to prove that the person has a dynamism of its own, and that specific laws govern its existence and evolution. Christ gave expression to this in a saying which is, on the face of it, profoundly paradoxical. He who would save his soul shall lose it, and he who would lose his soul for my sake shall find it again.
Okay, stop. Now that is one of the most important paradoxes of the New Testament, if you have not thought about this. If you don't understand that paradox, you do not understand Christianity, you do not understand Jesus Christ. And by the way, I've talked to many academics who are, let's say, liberal/progressive, and this is what they do not they simply cannot understand it. This does not compute. Why? Because in a sense you're saying you're giving up your life in order to get your life, and that just does not make sense. It makes sense to a Christian, makes sense to a disciple of Jesus Christ. One more paragraph.
The fullest, the most uncompromising form of love consists precisely in self-giving, in making one's inalienable and non-transferable I someone else's property. This is doubly paradoxical. Firstly, in that it is possible to step outside one's own I in this way, and secondly, in that the I, far from being destroyed or impaired as a result, is enlarged and enriched.
Now, amen. This is 97, okay. So this one you highlight with yellow and then with red and whatever color else you have. This is really, really, really important. The paradox is that the more I give of myself, what happens? The more I get back. So the more I give of myself, the more I become myself. So I become larger and deeper and broader and every other, the more I give away what I have. Now that's the paradox of life. And why is that? Why are we like that? Because God is like that. That's why. See? It's really, really simple. This is so simple, Donovan, that it's just, I can explain the theology of the body in 5 minutes. But the problem with that is then you say, yeah, but where's all the pain and suffering? I got to go through some pain. I got to go through Marine boot camp. I got to get there myself. See, so that's why we go through the pain and suffering in this class. And you will come up with this exact same thing. There are certain things that are absolutely key. By the way, this is another pier that we're talking about that goes into the ground. We talked about a pier and beam foundation. Pier, thing that goes down, then beams that go across.